A backyard at the edge of a Texas tract neighborhood. Lawn the color of an old paper bag, cracked in patches like dried mud at the bottom of a creek. The water bill on the kitchen counter, thicker every quarter. Most people stand at the back door, uncoil the hose, and try to keep the lawn alive. The water meter spins, the bill climbs, the grass dies anyway. But the dryland farmers who studied the land before the sprinkler was invented found something the lawn and garden industry has worked very hard to make people forget. In almost every case, the problem is not the drought. It is simply the wrong plants. Plants bred for rainfall the backyard does not get. There are 12 plants that need almost nothing after the first deep soak. Plants a 75-year-old can put in a raised bed without a shovel deeper than a forearm. Plants that feed the kitchen, settle a stomach, and pay the property taxes by the second summer. 12 of them, to be exact. Plants the USDA Agricultural Research Service has documented surviving on rainfall alone, that the Spanish mission gardeners of California planted as a matter of course, and that the lawn and garden industry would prefer the backyard grower never learn the names of. There is no profit in a prickly pear pad. This is the story of those 12. What each one feeds, what each one heals, what each one sells for at a Saturday market, and the one mistake the homeowner with the dying hedge makes every spring without knowing it. Before any of the 12, one quiet truth. Zero water does not mean zero preparation. Plants that survive on rainfall alone do it because the ground beneath them holds moisture the way a dry sponge holds the memory of water. The recipe is older than the bagged soil aisle. A trench, a foot deep. A bottom layer of woody brush, old grapevine, fruit tree prunings, anything dead and slow to rot. A middle layer of straw or aged manure. A top layer of native soil, mounded slightly. A handful of biochar. This is hugelkultur done plain. The wood holds water like a buried sponge. The straw feeds the fungi. The biochar carries what would otherwise wash through. One deep soak at planting. Mulch 4 inches thick. After that, the rain does the work. The 12 plants below are built for that ground. The lawn was not. First, the cactus that pays rent. What if the plant the highway crew mows down was the same one that fed Apache scouts through the dry months, and now sells for $5 a pound at the urban farmers market? It is. The plants are called nopales. The fruit are tunas. Both food, both medicine. Inside each pad sits mucilage polysaccharides, betalain pigments, and soluble fibers the body reads as both food and brake. The fruit carry beta-cyanin, the crimson compound that lowers the spike of a high-carb meal. University of Vienna researchers documented in 2007 that prickly pear betalain extract reduced markers of oxidative stress within hours of consumption. The mucilage works the way a dish rag works in a leaking pipe, coating the small intestine, slowing the sugar rush. The betalains shield the cell the way a window screen shields a porch at sunset. Most growers peel the green skin before cooking, the way a potato gets peeled. The skin is where the medicine lives. Scrape the spines, char the pad whole, slice. The skin stays. The pad does not just survive zero water, it stores it. 90% water by weight, banked from one rain to the next. One pad, flat on bare ground. 3 days for the cut to scab. Press into the soil. One deep soak. Walk away. The pad deepens to the green of an old enamel kettle. The fruit ripens dark as a wine stain on a tablecloth. By the third summer, the Saturday market table holds nopales jam at $12 a jar. Dried fruit, ground to powder, sells for $40 a pound at the small batch herbal shop. Twice the raw bushel rate. Same plant, one extra step at the kitchen counter. The retired teacher in Tucson, who lost her lawn 3 summers running, now ships dried tunas. The water bill no longer frightens her. The garden chain sells Bermuda grass starter at $9 a gallon. 18 gallons of water a week to stay green. The same chain does not sell prickly pear. There is no patent. There is no repurchase. The pad on the fence line is free, and the plant beneath it pays rent for 30 years. But the next plant does not feed by the pad. It feeds by the heart. Sap, the Aztec priests called the honey of the desert, 3,000 years before the sugar industry was a phrase. Agave, the plant that gives once and gives generously. What if the plant the distillers cut for tequila was the same plant Mesoamerican peoples tapped for syrup 3,000 years before the bottling industry stamped its first label? It is. The Aztec priests called the sap agua miel, honey water. Inside the heart sit fructans, short-chain inulin sugars the gut absorbs slowly, feeding the gut bacteria without the spike of cane. The Mexican Institute of Nutrition reported in 2003 that agave inulin elevated bifidobacteria counts within 2 weeks. The fructan works the way a slow drip works in a long fast, feeding without flooding. The gut steadies, the blood sugar holds. Most growers cut the agave too early. The plant has to bolt, push out the central stalk, before the heart sweetens. Mexican harvesters call that moment capon. Miss it by a season, and the syrup is bitter. Plant 1 pup off a parent rosette. 1 soak. No water for a year. The roots set deep. The leaves take on the dusty blue of a galvanized bucket. The center thickens. By year 10, the plant carries 30 gallons of water in its core. 1 roasted heart yields 6 quarts of syrup. Jarred and labeled, $28 a quart at the specialty market, 4 times cane by weight. The grandmother in Sonora who tapped her first agave at 70 ships agua miel across 2 states. She no longer asks her son for the property tax money. The sugar industry takes a federal subsidy on every acre of cane. The agave does not need a subsidy. It needs a pup, a trench, and 20 years of patience. But the next plant works on a faster timetable. A plant the gardener to the Queen of England kept beside the kitchen door because, as he wrote in 1633, the smell alone steadied the head. Rosemary. 3 years to a hedge, 7 to a small tree. Why does an evergreen herb from a Mediterranean cliff face thrive in a backyard where the lawn cooks brown by July? Because it is built for thin soil, salt wind, and drought. The leaves carry rosmarinic acid, carnosic acid, and 1,8-cineol, 3 compounds the National Institutes of Health has flagged for memory and circulation work since the 1990s. In 1633, the herbalist John Gerard wrote that rosemary comforteth the weak brain in a marvellous swift and short manner. The carnosic acid passes the blood-brain barrier. It works the way a clean lens works on an old window, clearing oxidative haze from neural tissue. Most growers kill rosemary by kindness. They water it. The roots rot in 3 weeks. Rosemary wants stones at its feet, sun on its back, no mulch against the trunk. A 4-inch cutting, dipped in honey, pressed into a sandy mix. 1 soak. After that, only what the rain provides. The leaves go dark green-grey, like the underside of an olive leaf. The stems lignify the colour of old saddle leather. By the 3rd winter, the plant holds its shape under snow. Fresh rosemary at the chain grocery. $4 for a half-ounce sprig. A 2-foot bush yields 2 pounds of leaf in a season. Tincture, dried or salt-cured, it sells for $14 an ounce at the small batch market. The widower in Ojai, who planted 3 cuttings, now ships rosemary salt to a chef in Brooklyn. The hedge along his driveway pays his power bill through the winter. The pharmaceutical pipeline funds a $100 million trial on synthetic carnosic acid analogues. The shrub at the kitchen door does the same work for the cost of a cutting. But the next 4 plants travel together. They are the herbs the old nuns of the Mediterranean cloister grew in one bed, for one purpose: to keep the household whole through a dry summer. Lavender. The herb the lawn industry calls decorative. It is not decorative. It is the workhorse of the 4-herb cloister bed, and the most misunderstood plant on the home gardener's list. The flower carries linalool and linaloyl acetate, 2 volatile compounds the body absorbs through the lungs in seconds. Researchers at the University of Vienna documented in 2012 that inhaled linalool reduced cortisol levels in test subjects within 30 minutes of exposure. The linalool works the way a hand on the shoulder works at the end of a long day. The nervous system steadies, the pulse slows, the breath deepens. Now, here is a point where much of the gardening advice online is simply wrong, and it is worth pausing on. The viral garden trope says lavender wants rich soil and regular water. Both kill it. Lavender evolved on rocky Mediterranean hillsides, where the soil drains in seconds and the rain comes once a season. Rich soil rots the crown. Regular water bloats the leaf and dilutes the oil. What lavender wants is gravel, sun, and one soak at planting. And here is the clinical differential the home gardener almost never gets straight. A headache from dehydration yields to water. A headache from screen strain yields to a dark room. A headache from nervous tension, the kind that builds across a Sunday afternoon, yields to lavender steam, 2 flower heads in a bowl of just boiled water, towel over the head, 3 minutes of quiet breathing. Most growers also prune lavender wrong. They cut into the woody base. The plant does not recover. Cut only the green growth twice a year and the bush lives for 15. The flower spike dries from violet blue to the dusty lavender of an old hymnal cover. The smell holds for a year past harvest. A single mature bush yields half a pound of dried bud. Loose dried lavender sells for $20 an ounce. Sachets at the Saturday market, $8 a piece, and the wholesale buyer takes 50 at a time. The widow in Squim who lost her husband and her lawn in the same year now ships lavender sachets to a wedding planner in Seattle. The driveway hedge pays the property tax. The cosmetics chain sells synthetic linalool in a $30 bottle. The flower in the backyard makes the same molecule for free. But the next 3 plants share lavender's bed and lavender's needs: sage, thyme, oregano. 3 herbs the old nuns called the kitchen trinity. Sage, the herb the Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder called salvia, from the Latin salvare, to be saved. Why does the silver-leaved bush in the cloister garden last longer than every other herb in the bed? Because the leaf is built like armour. Fine hairs that trap moisture, oils that repel browsing animals, roots that drive deep. The leaf carries thujone, rosmarinic acid, and camphor, 3 compounds the German Commission E approved for inflamed throat and excessive sweat as early as 1986. Hippocrates wrote in the 5th century BC that sage was the herb for women in midlife transition. 2,500 years later, German clinicians document the same use. The thujone works the way a steady hand works at a nervous task, quieting the sweat reflex, slowing the racing thought. Most growers harvest sage too late. The leaf grows bitter after the plant flowers. Cut the leaf in early summer, before the spike rises. Dry on a screen in the shade. 1 cutting struck in sand. 1 soak. After that, nothing. The leaf takes on the silver grey of a galvanized roof in winter sun. The flower spike rises pale violet, and the bees come from a quarter mile. Mature sage yields a pound of dried leaf a season. Dried sage at the herbal shop, $12 an ounce. Smudge bundles at the metaphysical shop, $18 a piece. The retired nurse in Sedona who lost her job and her garden the same year now ships sage bundles to a yoga studio in Denver. The hedge covers her supplemental income. But the next plant in the Trinity creeps low to the ground, and its oil does work the others cannot. Thyme, the herb the ancient Egyptians used to embalm, and the medieval villagers tied to wounds. What does a low-growing herb do that its taller cousins cannot? It carries thymol, a volatile phenol the German Commission E approved for bronchial conditions in 1990, and one of the strongest natural antimicrobials the herbal kitchen holds. The thymol works the way a clean wind works through a stale room. It scours, it opens, it clears. Most growers plant thyme in shade. It dies. Thyme wants full sun, sandy soil, and rocks at the root collar to shed water. A 4-inch cutting pressed into sand. 1 soak. After that, the plant minds itself. The leaf turns the green-grey of weathered wood. The stem creeps along the gravel like a quiet vine. By the second summer, a single plant covers a square yard. A mature patch yields 1.5 pounds of dried leaf annually. Dried thyme, $10 an ounce. Thyme-infused honey, steeped 6 weeks, sells for $22 a half pint at the farmer's market. The widower in New Mexico, who turned his front lawn into a thyme bed, now ships thyme honey to 2 restaurants in Santa Fe. The bed pays his utilities. But the third plant in the Trinity carries the strongest oil of the 4, and the medieval kitchen knew it as the herb that kept meat from spoiling in the heat. Oregano. The herb the medieval cook tied above the meat hook to keep flies off the summer ham. Why does a Mediterranean bush from the rocky hills of Crete kill more pathogens than most kitchen disinfectants? Because the leaf carries carvacrol, a phenol the journal Frontiers in Microbiology documented in 2018 as effective against 14 common foodborne pathogens. The herbalist Dioscorides, writing in the 1st century AD, called oregano oreganum, joy of the mountain. The carvacrol works the way a salt cure works on a fresh hide. It dries, it preserves, it shields what would otherwise rot. Most growers cut oregano too low. Cut only the top third of each stem, and the plant pushes out 3 new shoots for every 1 taken. A 4-inch division off a parent clump. Sand at the root, 1 soak. The plant takes from there. The leaf goes dark green and waxy. The flower spike comes pale lavender, and bees work it from sunup. By the second summer, the patch crowds out every weed beside it. 1 mature plant, 2 pounds of dried leaf. Dried oregano at the chain grocery, $8 an ounce. Carvacrol-rich oregano oil, cold-pressed at home, sells for $35 a half-ounce bottle at the herbal shop. The retired cook in Crete, who emigrated to Texas and planted her grandmother's cuttings, now ships oregano oil to 3 restaurants in Dallas. The bed pays for her grandchildren's school clothes. The supplement industry sells oregano oil capsules at $45 a bottle. The plant outside the kitchen door makes the molecule for free, and the smell of the fresh leaf is unmistakable on the wind. But the next plant comes back to the desert, and to a use the soap industry has spent 100 years trying to make the public forget. Yucca. The plant the Apache called amole, the soap plant. What if the spike-leaved bush in the southwestern garden was the same plant that washed every shirt and every head of hair in the Pueblo settlements before the soap industry was a phrase? It was. The root carries saponins, soap-making compounds that lather in cold water without lye, without tallow, without industrial chemistry. The 1898 King's American Dispensatory documented yucca root as a remedy for joint inflammation and skin conditions, prescribed by eclectic physicians from 1830 through 1939. The saponin works the way a wedge works on a stuck door. It lifts, it separates, it carries dirt away from the surface that holds it. Most growers plant yucca for the flower and ignore the root. The flower is edible, the seed pod is edible, but the root is the medicine and the soap. 1 root cutting, 6 inches long, pressed into sand, 1 soak. The plant lives 40 years. The leaf takes on the blue-green of an old highway sign. The flower stalk rises 6 feet, white and unmistakable, and the moths come for it at dusk. Mature yucca. A pound of root every 2 years. Yucca root soap bars, hand cast at the kitchen counter, sell for $9 a piece at the natural products shop. Yucca tincture for joint inflammation, $28 a 2-ounce bottle. The carpenter in Albuquerque who swapped his lawn for yucca now ships handmade yucca soap to a boutique in Santa Fe. The plot covers his diabetes medication. The soap industry spends $2 billion a year on television advertising. The yucca behind the shed makes a working bar of soap with no advertising at all. But the next plant breaks the pattern. It does not fight the drought. It welcomes it, and it has done so for 4,000 years. Pomegranate. The fruit the Persian poets called the food of paradise 4,000 years before the supplement aisles stocked it. Why does a small tree from the dry hills of ancient Persia produce a fruit the modern medical journal calls one of the strongest anti-inflammatory foods on earth? Because the seed carries punicalagin, a polyphenol the journal Atherosclerosis documented in 2004 as reducing arterial plaque thickness in human subjects over 12 months. The Hebrew Bible names pomegranate among the 7 species of the Promised Land. King Solomon's robes were embroidered with it. The punicalagin works the way a slow filter works on hard water. It captures what would otherwise crystallize. It carries off what would otherwise build. Most growers plant pomegranate in fertile bottom soil. The tree wilts. Pomegranate wants sloped ground, lean dirt, and 1 good rain a year. A bare root sapling, 2 feet tall, 1 soak at planting. After that, the taproot finds water 12 feet down. The leaf takes on the bright green of a new dollar bill. The flower comes orange-red, the colour of a brick kiln at sunset. The fruit ripens dark crimson, the colour of dried blood on a butcher's apron. A mature tree yields 50 pounds of fruit a season. Fresh pomegranate at the chain grocery, $4 a piece. The same tree's juice, cold-pressed and bottled at home, sells for $14 a quart at the urban farmers market. The retired truck driver in Phoenix who planted 3 saplings now sells pomegranate juice across the county. He no longer drives nights. But the next plant is older still, older than King Solomon, older than the cuneiform tablet that named it, the fig. The first cultivated fruit tree in human record. 11,000 years. What if the tree in the corner of the Mediterranean farmhouse garden was the same tree the archaeological team in the Jordan Valley dated to 9,400 BC? Older than wheat, older than the written word. It is. Ficus carica, the common fig. The fruit carries phycin, calcium, potassium, and a pectin matrix the digestive tract reads as both food and lubricant. The Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder, writing in 77 AD, prescribed fig for chronic constipation and lung complaints, uses the British herbal pharmacopoeia carries forward to the present. The pectin works the way a soft brush works on rough wood. It sweeps, it carries, it leaves the surface clean. Most growers prune fig trees the way they prune apples. The fig fruit's on new wood, not old. Cut hard each winter, and the tree pays back with twice the fruit. A hardwood cutting, 10 inches long, pressed into sand. 1 soak. By the second summer, a 4-foot tree. The leaf takes on the dusty green of a farm truck after harvest. The fruit ripens to the dark purple of an old bruise, and at that colour, it must come off the tree the same day or it splits. Mature fig, 40 pounds of fruit a season. Fresh fig at the urban grocery, $9 a pint. Dried fig, sun-cured on a screen, sells for $16 a pound at the small batch market. The widow in southern Oregon who planted 1 cutting from her grandmother's farm now ships dried figs to bakeries in 3 states. The single tree pays her grocery bill through winter, but the next plant comes from older ground still. The Chinese herbal calls it the king of fruits, and it has been cultivated continuously for 4,000 years. Jujube, the Chinese red date. Why does a thorny tree from the dry plains of northern China survive the Texas summer better than every native fruit tree the southern nursery sells? Because it evolved on the Yellow River loess, clay so dry it cracks like old paint, soil so lean the taproot drives 40 feet to find water. The fruit carries jujubosides, vitamin C, and a complex of saponin compounds the Journal of Ethnopharmacology documented in 2008 as supporting sleep and reducing nervous agitation. The 1st century Chinese herbal Shennong Bensao Jing, the divine farmer's materia medica, names jujube among the upper-class herbs, those that lengthen life without side effect. The jujuboside works the way a porch swing works on a hot afternoon. It slows, it steadies, it carries the body toward rest. Most growers in the US have never heard of jujube. The tree fruits in the second year, fruits heavily by the fourth, and lives 100. A bare root tree, 3 feet tall, one soak, no water after. The leaf takes on the glossy green of polished wax. The fruit ripens from green to mahogany red, the colour of an old pew. Eaten fresh, it is crisp like an apple. Dried, it is sweet like a date. Mature jujube, 60 pounds of fruit a season. The chain grocery does not stock it. They have never seen one. At the Asian market, $4 a pound. Dried jujube sells for $14 a pound at the herbal shop. The retired engineer in Central Texas, who planted 3 jujube saplings, ships dried fruit to acupuncturists in 3 states. The orchard pays for his grandchildren's college fund contributions. The American nursery industry sells fruit trees that need 50 inches of rain a year. The jujube needs 10, and it has carried Chinese farmers through 4,000 years of drought. But the last plant comes from no other continent. It is American to the marrow, and it fed the men who walked from St. Louis to the Pacific in 1805. Saskatoon berry, the fruit that fed the West. What if the small purple berry the Plains First Nations gathered in the dry summer hills was the same berry Meriwether Lewis recorded in his 1805 expedition journal as service berry, the staple of the pemmican that carried his men 3,000 miles? It is. Amelanchier alnifolia. Native to the dry plains of North America from Saskatchewan to New Mexico, the fruit carries anthocyanins, chlorogenic acid, manganese, and a mineral profile the US Department of Agriculture has documented as exceeding blueberries by a factor of 2. The Cree word for the berry is Missisquatomina. The town of Saskatoon takes its name from it. The anthocyanin works the way a quiet rain works on a parched field. It reaches the small vessels, it steadies the wall, it slows the slow oxidation that hardens tissue with age. Most growers in the US have never heard of Saskatoon. The bush grows wild from Manitoba to Colorado, and the nursery industry has not figured out how to patent it. A bare root sapling, 2 feet tall, one soak. By the second summer, 10 pounds of berry. The fruit ripens from green to red to the dark indigo of a thunderhead before rain. The flavour is almonds and blueberry. The plains gatherers compared it to nothing else. Mature Saskatoon, 30 pounds of fruit a season. Fresh Saskatoon at the Pacific Northwest market, $11 a pint. Dried Saskatoon, ground into pemmican-style protein bars with bison and beef tallow, sells for $48 a pound at the small batch market. And here is where the value-added story breaks open. Raw berries are seasonal. Pemmican bars keep 2 years on the shelf. The same berry, dried and pressed with rendered fat, sells for 4 times the fresh price, and the recipe is older than the United States. The plains farmers in the eastern Dakotas, who lost crops to drought 3 years running, are now planting Saskatoon hedgerows that survive on rainfall alone, and pulling $6,000 an acre from land their grandfathers could barely break with a plough. The bigger the agricultural export industry grows, the more it has to forget the foods that fed the continent before it. Saskatoon does not appear on the commodity board in Chicago. It appears in the journals of the men who walked to the Pacific. There is no profit in a berry the patent office cannot register. 12 plants: prickly pear, agave, rosemary, lavender, sage, thyme, oregano, yucca, pomegranate, fig, jujube, Saskatoon. Each one a survivor, each one a feeder, each one a quiet payment against the property tax bill that comes every January. The dryland farmer does not need the sprinkler system, the bagged soil, the fertilizer that runs off in the first rain. The dryland farmer needs 12 plants, a trench, a layer of woody brush, and the patience to wait until the second summer. That is the trade. Never the spinning meter, never the climbing bill, never the brittle hedge that does not come back. Picture the same backyard, 3 summers on. The lawn is gone. The water bill has shrunk to the price of 1 cup of coffee a week. The Saturday market table holds prickly pear jam, sachets of lavender, bars of yucca soap. And in the kitchen, the same hands that once stood at the back door uncoiling the hose now hold a bowl of Saskatoon berries dried with rendered fat, pemmican by the recipe that walked to the Pacific. The grass does not have to come back. The land can do better than grass. The viewer who has known one of these 12 plants since childhood, leave the name in the comments. The viewer who has never planted a single one, leave the name of the one to be tried first. Send the script to the neighbour whose lawn dies every August. The land does not need rescue. It needs the right plants. The grandchildren will inherit the orchard the lawn could never become.